What's good, everybody? Welcome to a live edition of Straight Out of Flushing. Busy day here in New York post sports land. We got some breaking news surrounding the Mets. We got to react to it. Had another episode planned for the people around the Mets, and now this takes precedence because the Mets just made a trade. They're trading away one of their homegrown players in Brandon Nimmo. He will be going to the Texas Rangers, and coming back to New York will be second baseman Marcus Semien. A very interesting trade for the Mets. The Mets have talked a lot about needing to shore up their defense, needing to get better defensively. Marcus Semien can help with that. Some people may look at this trade, and we're going to get into all of this on this show. Well, they're losing a bat in Brandon Nimmo that provided them some power, that provided them some other things, but had slipped defensively, can no longer play him in center field. Honestly, a little shaky in left field. But we're going to discuss all of that in the trade. I'm intrigued to hear from everyone in the chat. I know a lot of you are waiting and watching in the chat. Let us know what you think of this trade. Do you like it? Do you like Brandon Nimmo being moved here for Marcus Semien? Let us know what you think there in the chat. But we've got ourselves a fantastic show. Got some really good guests joining me. We have Anthony Rivera of the Subway to Shea podcast joining me. John Sapanaro of the Till Mets Do Us Part podcast also will be joining me a little later in the show. And then our very own MLB columnist and insider, John Heyman, will also be joining me as well. But first up, I guess leading off is my guy from the Subway to Shea podcast. Anthony Rivera joins me now so we can talk a little bit about this. Anthony, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. This trade somewhat comes out as a shock, but not as much. I think you and I had talked about, possibly trading Brandon Nimmo. This was the contract that the Mets really needed to figure out a way to trade. Now, I love Brandon Nimmo. He's one of my favorite Mets. But if you're talking about retooling this team and changing, I don't want to say changing the culture, but just changing what the lineup looks like, and David Stearns finally make his mark on this team. This is the contract you want to trade. There's so much left on this deal, signed through 2030. It was an 8-year deal, $162 million for him to center field. And he only played 1 year in center field and the rest in left field. And as we've seen him play over the last couple of years, you start seeing the body starting to deteriorate for Brandon Nimmo, to the point where I'm saying, if I'm keeping Brandon Nimmo on this roster, at some point he's going to have to be the DH of this team. And I'm pretty sure the Mets want to go in different directions and have many lanes opens when it comes to the DH. So Brandon Nimmo had to be the guy to get traded. Now they get Marcus Semien, who's 35 years old, but his deal ends in 2028. I think John Heyman, who's going to be on the show later, mentioned that the Mets are going to send $5 million extra as part of this deal. So it's a 1-for-1. I am okay with this trade for as of right now. I need to see what the end result is, and I assume that there's going to be a lot of work that this Mets team is going to do, that David Stearns is going to do, and it really jumpstarts the point in him saying that this team needs to get more defensive, get to have more run prevention, and they do. A guy like Marcus Semien, who's a very good defensive player at second base, and as we saw, Brandon Nimmo started to struggle out there in the outfield.
Yeah, we were seeing that, and I think you and I talked about this at the end of the season. I'm glad you mentioned it. We were saying, hey, we would not necessarily be upset if we saw the Mets try to improve defensively, move on from Brandon Nimmo. Jeff McNeil, another name we had mentioned, and now with Semien here, we'll get to this a little later. You would think the Mets are moving on from Jeff McNeil already, but here's going to be the opposition to what you said, Anthony, in terms of you being okay with this trade. Some fans, I think, and some people around baseball are going to look at this and say, well, Nimmo had better offensive numbers than Semien in almost every single category last year. Nimmo played 30 more games than Semien, who's had a lot of injury history himself through his career. Semien played in 127 games, Nimmo in 155. And then you got the age factor as well, too. Semien is 35. He is 3 years older than Nimmo. And so he's an elder statesman baseball-wise, we would say there. Do any of those things concern you? Yes, you were losing some offensive production, but I think we all would understand that Semien is the better defensive player right now, despite him being older. Are you concerned with losing the offensive production that you had from Brandon Nimmo, or is this just a sign that, hey, the Mets can get better defensively up the middle at second and replace that offensive production as they're going to try to revamp this outfield, because now they need a center fielder and a left fielder? So does any of the concerns on the other side for folks who don't like this trade because they say you're losing all the offense that you had from Brandon Nimmo, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I totally understand Met fans being concerned about this. And I posted a tweet probably about 5 minutes before we went on the air saying that my biggest concern was that Brandon Nimmo was a really good clutch player. He batted 310 with runners in scoring position. And we all know how the Mets struggled to score with runners in scoring position all season
Yep.
long. To lose that bat on top of possibly losing Pete Alonso. Now the Mets, on top of having to get a top ace pitcher, having to either replace Edwin Diaz or bring him back and retool the bullpen, now have to add two bats in the order. This is going to be a tall, tough task for David Stearns this offseason. But that is probably my biggest concern, is losing that clutch ability that Brandon Nimmo had.
That I think that is a good point. And I just want to go to the money for everyone here because Anthony brought it up before. Semien is owed $72 million over the next 3 seasons. Brandon Nimmo, as you heard Anthony mention before, he's owed $102.5 million over the next 5 seasons. So the Mets get off some larger money off the books sooner here. So there's also financial incentive for the Mets too. Now, the point you mentioned, Anthony, it all matters how they reinvest that, right? How do they reinvest this here and replace that production that they had from Brandon Nimmo? And I think that takes us to the next place that a lot of Mets fans are going to wonder, and they're going to say, okay, well, what are you going to do in center field? Who should the Mets go after in center field? Is it a Cody Bellinger? Is it trading for Luis Robert Jr.? And then what do you do in left field? Have you thought about any options for that, Anthony, and what you maybe think the Mets should do in terms of revamping their outfield and who they're going to put next to Juan Soto?
Yeah, the best option here is to, and sorry to say this, Yankee fans, probably go after Cody Bellinger. He's one of the best outfielders in the game. He'll be good in center field. He could play first base if they don't, bring back Pete Alonso. When we were talking about, how we were going to do the episode before this and talking about defense,
Yeah.
that was the name that came to mind, was Cody Bellinger. He kills 2 birds with 1 stone, being able to play center field, being able to play first base. And that's probably where I would go if I'm going.
I think we lost Anthony here. I'm not able to hear Anthony anymore. He might have froze up a little bit. We'll wait to see if we get Anthony back. Wanted to check what some folks were saying in the chat. A lot of you with very different reactions to this trade. And one of the things that should be noted, this was a trade that had to be approved by Brandon Nimmo because he had his no trade clause. He waived his no trade clause to go to Texas. Now, a lot of people know his boy Jacob deGrom, now down there in Texas, former Met. So we know that, and he was able to waive it and go there. So I'm seeing mixed reactions here in the chat from fans on this. Some of you like the trade. Mr. Gregory322 says, sad day for the Mets and Mets fans. What a disgusting trade. Disgusting. That's pretty harsh there in terms of disgusting. Do we have Anthony back? We do have Anthony back. All right, so Anthony is back with us. We will bring him back in the point that he was making. Anthony, you're back with me. Glad you got everything worked out. Please continue with the point you were making about Cody Bellinger.
Yeah, like I was saying, I think that him in center field is probably the best defensive option outside of, Tyrone Taylor's a great defensive player, but he's not going to provide you much of offense there. So if they get a guy like Cody Bellinger, obviously he could play center field. He could get reps at first base as well if they decide not to bring back Pete Alonso. And that's if David Stearns wants to continue going this defensive route that he's trying to do by bringing in Marcus Semien. So maybe it's to make the defense stronger up the middle with Marcus Semien, as well as Francisco Lindor and a guy like Cody Bellinger. On top of that, the Mets themselves, and I think David Stearns mentioned this during the GM meetings, the players have to play better defense. The ones that are on this team. I mean, Lindor was not great last season at shortstop. There was a lot of struggle with a lot of these guys defensively. We know the deficiencies that Juan Soto has in right field. So the Mets have a lot of work that needs to be done this offseason. It's going to be a very interesting offseason in how David Stearns puts this team together, because they should be a playoff team at the very least. There's no reason that they shouldn't be. They need to get a lot of things done, and hopefully Stearns is up to the task, because Met fans aren't going to be happy if they don't get it done.
No, I think you and I, Anthony, we talked about this in the offseason. We've talked about this on several shows. We knew this was a big offseason for the Mets here and on Stearns. And I think a lot of fans said, look, I don't want to see small market Stearns here. I don't want to see nickel and diming. I don't want to see bargain basement shopping. This is not what they want to see. And I don't think it's necessarily about spending the money, right? But getting players that can fit, winning players here. When you make a move like this and you trade a homegrown guy, and I'm going to speak to this because I understand this is the case for some fans. A lot of fans have attachment to homegrown guys, right? And it's tough when you move on from them. And this is going to be the case with Pete Alonso as well, too. But when you move on from a homegrown guy like Brandon Nimmo, do you think this puts more pressure on David Stearns to produce this offseason and bring in talent to this team that can get them back to the playoffs and be what they hope to be, which is a World Series contender, and try to narrow that gap between themselves and the Dodgers?
I honestly think he keeps adding more pressure on himself. I mean, there was enough pressure that this team that made it to within 2 games of the World Series in 2024 not only completely missed making the postseason, but had one of, an epic fail to end the season, could not win one game in Miami to make it in and let the Reds get in. There's a lot of pressure in there. There's a lot of pressure on him to get this team back to the postseason and be consistent. I mean, it's every other year with this team, and sometimes even longer. They need to be consistently in the postseason. I will say this about this deal is that, there was a lot of talk about it would be impossible to trade Brandon Nimmo's contract. They're not going to be able to get rid of this contract. And he just did. He just was able to get rid of the contract, which, let's be fair, it's not going to end well. I mean, I love Brandon Nimmo. Yes, he's a homegrown player, but we saw the writing on the wall with how he was playing in the outfield. His body is not going to hold up in left field. He was signed to play as a center fielder, like I said earlier, and then they moved him to left field within 1 year. And you can see him struggle to get routes on the ball. He can't really throw. What are you going to do with a guy like that, 2 or 3 years down the line? He's going to have to become a DH. He's a very good hitter, and that's probably going to be what's best for him. And this is a guy that was leading off for us for a long time. Getting rid of this contract is huge for the future of this team, and it takes away some money that is going to be so heavily invested in him. To now they'll get rid of the contract for Semien within a couple of years. So I know Met fans are upset about it. I'm not saying that I don't love Brandon Nimmo. I thought he was a great Met, and I think that they will struggle without him offensively. But defensively, which is what Stearns has been talking about all offseason, he did what he said he was going to do, and he made this more of a defensive team.
And the Mets did need, we talked about the Mets absolutely needed to get better defensively. I think when you look at Semien and what he can bring defensively, and this is where I want to go next, among qualified second baseman in 2025, he was tied for the 5th best OAA, outs above average there. So that's really good from him. I understand the bat is not what Brandon Nimmo's is, but how do you see Semien fitting into this lineup? And are you excited about what he can bring defensively up the middle with him at second and Francisco Lindor at short?
As much as I'm excited for a little bit of change in the lineup, he is 35 years old. Like that's
right.
He's getting older. I don't know how great his defense is going to be. He had an injury season last year. This is I'm not going to say that this is a rosy deal because, it's not. This was more to move on from Nimmo's contract. That's the biggest thing. Nimmo's contract and defense. That's the biggest thing to come out of this. And I do have concerns defensively with a guy that's 35 years old. Like at some point, I said Nimmo's body's breaking down. I mean, at some point, Semien's body could break down too. It could be in this Mets team. So, the Mets are taking a gamble here. I just hope that Semien brings a little bit more offense than he did last year and is a more capable second baseman than the guys that we had, which was that rotating guys of McNeil and Beatty, and you want to throw Mauricio out there, Luis Angel Acuna too. He couldn't hit at all. So if he can be better than that group of players, I think that's for the best.
I do think that could be pretty good. And the other thing I've thought about here too, Anthony, is, and we'll put a bow on this, but when you look at this trade, with Semien, and I do have some concerns about him with his age, but I do think you're right. I think you hit the nail on the head. This is a deal that is about moving off of Brandon Nimmo, his long-term contract, his money, especially with his injury history and his body breaking down. I wonder if this is a situation where the Mets could then look at Semien, and depending on how he produces this year, do they then themselves maybe sell low on him and, push him elsewhere, maybe try to get younger at second base down the road? Is he just sort of a stopgap? He feels like a stopgap at his age this year. But it's just, I wonder how soon could they maybe flip and turn it around. I guess the thing I also add with this is, what do you then think this means for Jeff McNeil? And do you think the Mets move on from him? And what do you think the market, is there really a market for Jeff McNeil, who honestly hasn't hit the ball that well in about 3 seasons?
Yeah, his biggest attribute is that he's a utility guy, and you can move him anywhere around in the order. You can move him anywhere in the infield or outfield. That's the biggest thing for Jeff McNeil. I think that he's next on the move. I don't see us getting that much from him. Maybe if they could get a relief pitcher or something, maybe that would be great. But he was another guy that's been talked about all offseason about being on the trade block. And we just heard about Brandon Nimmo, last week? And now he's gone.
Right.
I think Jeff McNeil will be on the move as well. And the Mets are, I don't know if it was Will Salmon. Someone had posted that the Mets are looking, maybe it was Jeff Passan, that the Mets were looking to kind of shake up the core. I can't quote who exactly said that, but they were looking to shake up the core. And the main core for such a long time was Brandon Nimmo, Jeff McNeil, and Pete Alonso. Right now, Brandon Nimmo's gone. Pete Alonso's a free agent. And I assume that at some point this offseason, they're going to move on from Jeff McNeil.
It will be interesting to see how much they shake up this core. We have a lot more to talk about with this trade for the Mets. Brandon Nimmo headed to Texas. Marcus Semien headed here to New York. That is Anthony Rivera of the Subway to Shea podcast. Check him out there. Anthony, we had a whole other plan. We were supposed to do a Thanksgiving-themed episode today. But
I had my list ready. I had everything ready to go.
Ready. It was going to be a fun episode. Well, maybe we'll shift that to something else when Anthony will be back on with me to do that down the road. But news breaks, and you're in the game too, and we all have to be on top of it. So I appreciate you coming on with me, my friend. We switched some plans, but we still were able to have a conversation about the Mets, and we'll see what else they do throughout this offseason. So thank you.
Dexter, it's always a pleasure, man. Thank you so much.
Anytime. Once again, check out Anthony Rivera. Great podcast. Subway to Shea podcast. One of my favorites in terms of Mets content there. We got a great show here, live show. Thank you for rocking with us here on the New York Post Sports YouTube channel. Live reaction to the Mets trade of Brandon Nimmo for Marcus Semien. John Heyman, our Mets insider and columnist, he will be joining us later in the show. But I've got another John joining me. It's a party of Johns. John Sapanaro of the Till Mets Do Us Part podcast. Another one of my favorite Mets podcasts out there. He's here with me now to talk about this trade. John, what's going on, man? How you doing?
What's up, Dexter? How you doing, man? I'm a little shocked, honestly.
Okay, well, let's start there, because I was here in studio and I was doing a Jets video. Actually, it was Jets video we were doing, and then I saw the trade pop up from Jeff Passan, and I will say this. I'm not shocked they moved on from Nimmo, and I had even talked about it myself that maybe that should be a direction they should look at. Maybe I'm shocked about how soon it happened, especially because we saw reports of them shopping him just as early as last week. So a little bit shocked, but I do think it's the right move. What was your initial reaction to this, beside being somewhat shocked?
Okay, couple things. One, Jeff Passan don't miss, right? I mean, everybody criticized him. I mean, like, he's a guy who is known for breaking these kinds of stories. But when he put out sort of this thought process that he was being a little bit more speculative, and that's not really his style, especially this time of year. And, I think any criticism that went Jeff Passan's way is probably undeserved. And it definitely, it came back. And look, this guy knows what he's talking about. And if you ever had any doubts, maybe you should do away with those doubts. As far as shocked is concerned, my shock, it's that it happened. I talked about it on the show with my co-host Ibby last week, And we said, look, we would move on from Brandon Nimmo. It's just very difficult to move on from Brandon Nimmo. He's overpaid in terms of years, not dollars. If his contract was the same exact contract that it is, but for 3 years, I think you could trade him. But at 5 years, it's probably not a movable deal. And then you have to eat some money. Let's just say $25-30 million. So whoever you replace him with, even if it's big game hunting like Kyle Tucker, well, Kyle Tucker might sign a $400 million deal. Then you tack on $30 million that you're paying Brandon Nimmo to not be on your team. It just becomes this thing where I don't know if you can do the math and make that work. So I think it was the right thing to do. I think if you put sentimentality away for a second, the Mets will try now to get younger. The Mets moved away from $28 million in total contract. They went from a 5-year contract to a 3-year contract, and they got an elite defensive second baseman. He is not the hitter that Brandon Nimmo is at this point in their respective careers, but I think it opens up the door for them to do a lot more in the outfield and some other things. And I'm just shocked that they were able to do it. I thought for sure they'd have to eat money in order to move Brandon Nimmo, but what they did was they took on another team's salary that they didn't want in Marcus Semien. So I guess it does make sense.
Yeah, I do think that's a shocking part of it, that they did not have to eat any money at all here. And I guess there's an argument you can look at this and say the fact that they did that, that's a win, right? Because you just talked about how hard it would be to move a 5-year contract to what Brandon Nimmo was making, and they didn't have to take on any money. This is a win. Now they've got flexibility to put in other places. And I just want to be clear. I'm not saying that's easy. There's a lot of work with that, right? The Mets have to hit. They have to either make good trades or sign the right guys. It's not that easy just saying, hey, we're going to put the money here and this is definitely going to work. But I guess I'll ask you this too, and I had Anthony on before and I asked him this as well. Okay, this is where everybody goes. We could get to the minutia of this trade, and we know Semien is not the offensive player that Brandon Nimmo is, but he's a better defensive player and all of that. Where would you like to see the Mets go next as they reshape this outfield and try to put 2 players they now have to next to Juan Soto? Where would you like to see them go this offseason, whether it be via free agency or trade?
So there's a couple ways to answer this. I think big picture, this opens up a lot of avenues for them. I caught the tail end of your conversation with Anthony when I first jumped in, and I think Jeff McNeil is gone. I think it's a foregone conclusion that at some point he will be traded. So that's just another piece off of the roster that's going to give them a little bit more flexibility. I think it also opens up the door to make Jet Williams available in a bigger deal, whether it's for a starting pitcher or for an outfielder or whatever the case may be. This is a guy who's one of the better prospects in baseball, certainly one of the better prospects in the Mets system. He's a prospect a lot of Mets fans like, and you never want to see those guys go. But I think this is the kind of situation where you say, well, the Mets do have Marcus Semien for the next 3 years. Now, maybe he's a DH in a year or two. Maybe he's playing third base. Who knows? But I do think it opens up the potential to make some kind of a blockbuster trade with Jet Williams included in the mix. And so part of that is, I think when you look at it, you have to look at what they want to do in the outfield. Again, Brandon Nimmo, very good player. It's clear that he's lost the step even for left field. The Mets tolerate what Juan Soto does in right field because he's Juan Soto. But we saw how that team took a massive hit by putting Jeff McNeil in center field and having him flanked by the likes of Brandon Nimmo and Juan Soto. They wanted to get better defensively. They needed to get better defensively. And it's kind of hard to do that when you have Nimmo locked in one corner while he's being paid like a center fielder and an elite one at that, and Juan Soto locked into the other one. So what I would like to see them do, and I don't know if this is pie in the sky, I have no idea, but there was a lot of talk, even in the Passan article, about Kyle Tucker potentially being of interest to the Mets. There's been this kind of thing thrown out there that maybe Fernando Tatis Jr. might be available from a Padres team that needs to get out of money, and the only contract they can really trade is Tatis Jr., and they're looking to sell the team. I think that's where the Mets might be leaning, is something massive. Tucker, Tatis, sure, it could be Bellinger too, and I would be happy with that. But I think when you look at the Mets plan, They've got Juan Soto, who's now 27 years old. I think they'd like to pair him with a comparably aged superstar. Kyle Tucker is 28. Tatis Jr. is 26, I think. So you're looking at two players that can be your core once Francisco Lindor is a little bit older. And whether or not they bring back Pete, who knows? But, if they do bring back Pete on, let's say, a 3-year deal, that's not going to matter in year 6 of the Soto contract. So I think the Mets are doing this move. I know they got older because Semien is older than Brandon Nimmo, but I think they're doing it to try to get younger, trying to get more athletic in that outfield spot, and to pair Soto with somebody who is more his peer age-wise, so that they can be the ones who are the Batman and Robin of this team in, I don't know, 3 or 4 years.
So I find all that interesting that you said. And I think, that's the thing the Mets fans are going to want to know. And this is the thing when deals are made, right? John, you don't know what the next move is. Everybody's going to want to know what the next move is. But that's the beauty of it. And why we do this as sports fans is that we don't know what that move is. I wonder if the Mets do what you said, or just are opportunistic to swing big, is what I will say. I wonder how that affects the Pete Alonso negotiations. Does he come back? Is he part of their plans? The Mets are showing here to not necessarily have an attachment to or have any sentimentality here, right, with Brandon Nimmo as a homegrown player. And look, this is a new front office with David Stearns. This is not a player he brought up through the farm system, so he's not going to have those attachments. So it is going to be interesting to see what they do. I want to ask you something about Marcus Semien here, John. Before I do, we got to shout out your co-host here, Ibby, in the chat.
Yes.
Who Ibby says I got to vet these guests, man. He says you're a character. I don't know if I'm supposed to have you on. I got to vet the guests here. That's good. Shout out to Ibby, man. Shout out to Ibby. We appreciate that. I think a lot of fans would love the Tatis move, like you said. I want to get back to some other moves in a second. But let me ask you this. In terms of Marcus Semien, and I talked with Anthony about what he brings on the defensive end, even still at his age of 35. Do you have concerns about his limitations on offense? 230 hitter last year. Do you have your concerns about him and his limitations on offense and where he can fit in this Mets lineup, which, to be fair, we don't know exactly how it's going to look based on other moves they might make, but do you have any concerns about him offensively?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to have concerns about him offensively. He's going to average about $25 million over the next 3 years. That's a lot of money. That's being paid like a top-tier hitter, which he once was. I know the bat speed is down in addition to some of the numbers that you just shouted out from last year. And he looks like a guy who might be a bit on the decline over the last 2 seasons or so. So there's definitely concern there, but I think you can offset some of the concern with a few things. One, you mentioned he's an elite second baseman still, and it's like elite in capital letters underlined. He's still that good. And I think that's really important. Now, for a Mets team that struggled on defense, that should be very important to any Mets fan that's listening to this and watching it. I know everybody gets excited about the offense and what a player can bring offensively. That's also a big part of it, right? You can't win if you don't score runs. I get it. But defense up the middle is crucial. Now you have Lindor and Semien, and those are 2 elite defenders playing next to each other. You can't just sweep that under the rug as if it's nothing. As far as the offense is concerned too, he's a guy who pulls a lot of fly balls. And pulling fly balls is a way to have success as a guy who's got some pop. And I know, again, his power numbers have declined, but most baseball players, major leagues, minor leagues, rec league, little league, it doesn't matter. Most players are successful when you pull balls in the air. More people have more power to their pull side than they do going the other way. And so I think there are some things here that wouldn't necessarily surprise me. You know, he had, I think, like a 2-WAR season in 2025. If he rebounded a little bit offensively and he kept that elite defense, I could see him being a 3.5 WAR player. If he ever got to 4, that's a very good regular again. And I don't think that's insane. A couple of years ago, he was a 6 WAR player. I don't think he'll ever get back to that. But I think the defense is going to skew what he does in totality. And I think we talked about it the last time I was on the show. the bottom of the Mets order was more the problem, not the top of the Mets order. Brandon Nimmo, Juan Soto, Francisco Lindor, and Pete Alonso all did their jobs, and they did it very well. So if you're going to replace Brandon Nimmo with Marcus Semien, it's going to seem like on the surface, your offense is taking a hit. But again, if the replacement truly is Kyle Tucker, or if it's ever Fernando Tatis Jr., and Marcus Semien is batting 7th, now all of a sudden it starts to make a lot more sense, which is why I think just keeping the bigger picture in mind is the most important thing for Mets fans. I know it's hard because it's an emotional day. Brandon Nimmo was drafted here. I said until Mets do his part that I just didn't think Nimmo would waive a no trade clause, because this is a guy who had the opportunity to spend his whole career as a Met and maybe get his number up at Citi Field. And there's only one person who's ever done that, and it's David Wright. All the other retired numbers are guys who either left or got here later or whatever. So I get the sentimentality, but I think you have to put that aside and you have to just look at what the Mets are trying to do and how they're trying to build in the future.
Let me throw a couple quick things at you before we go, and then we're bringing John Heyman. When you look at the rest of this offseason, this is really going to start to take shape for the Mets after this move. Do they, in your eyes, do they have to bring back Pete Alonso and Edwin Diaz? Do both of those guys have to come back and be Mets in 2026?
I love Pete Alonso. Pete Alonso's probably my irrational attachment guy.
Oh no, John, I feel a butt coming. Once you started with that, I feel like a butt is coming. Go, I'm gonna let you go. Go ahead.
Okay. I have a bunch of Mets jerseys in my closet. The only current player that I have in my closet is Pete Alonso. That's where my attachment lies. I love Lindor, I love Soto, but Pete Alonso was my guy when he first came up. And so that's where my irrational attachment is. I do think Edwin Diaz is more important for the Mets to retain than Pete Alonso, because I don't think there is a clear line in how you can replace Edwin Diaz on a team that's expected to be a playoff contender, a division winning contender, hopefully a World Series contender. Those teams need closers. And you've got a little bit in the back end of the bullpen with AJ Minter coming back. Hopefully he's healthy. You've got Brooks Raley, who had the option on his contract. You start to get Edwin Diaz, if they ever did the other thing that was in the Passan article, which is, bring in Devin Williams and Edwin Diaz. Now you've got the makings of a great bullpen. So I think he's the one you have to retain. You never know if closers are going to be good year over year, but you also don't know which closers can perform in a market like New York. Edwin Diaz is the best closer in baseball still. I don't know if he will be at the end of a 5-year contract. I don't think it matters. You have Steve Cohen's money, pay and go get the best player. The best player is Edwin Diaz. That's not to say that Alonso's replaceable, but there is an opportunity. If you went out and signed Kyle Schwarber, well, you could replace Pete's numbers that way. You could also do something where maybe you combine, I don't know, Cody Bellinger with Alex Bregman or Cody Bellinger with Bo Bichette. Neither one of those guys is going to give you Pete's numbers, but they are going to give you better defense. They are going to give you, especially if Bo Bichette's not playing shortstop, which he wouldn't here, they're going to give you defensive versatility. They're going to give you a lot of different things. So to me, you can kind of, shake the dice and come out with a situation where the Mets are a better team without Pete Alonso. I don't think there's any way the Mets can be a better team without Edwin Diaz. And, that said, I would keep both of them, but I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do. I would keep both. But if you had to,
you want to keep both, but if you had to rank, you put Diaz at the top and Alonso right underneath in terms of importance of keeping.
Slightly.
We'll see. Slightly, very, very slightly. We'll see how the rest of this offseason goes. It's got off to a spectacular, shocking start. It's a word we used at the beginning of this conversation, John. We'll see how the rest of it goes. Everybody, that is John Sapanaro. Check him and Ibby, who's in the chat. We appreciate you, Ibby. Check out their podcast, Till Mets Do Us Part podcast. Fantastic podcast covering the Mets. I still have to get both you guys on at the same time. That has to happen. So we're going to make that happen. John, I appreciate you. I hit you with the bat signal last minute and you came through. So I appreciate you, bro. Thank you.
Anytime, man. It's always easier 3 hours earlier on the West Coast anyway. So thanks for having me on.
This is true. I forgot how much earlier it is for you out there. It's been a long, late day for me. But be well, man. We'll talk soon, my friend. Thank you.
Take it easy.
All right, check out John Sapanaro, as I said, again, on the Till Mets Do Us Part podcast. We're not done here on this live reaction Mets show. Mets trading Brandon Nimmo for Marcus Semien. A lot of reaction. I see a lot of you in the chat with a lot of good questions, comments. We appreciate everybody for checking in on this live edition of Straight Outta Flushing. But I've got another guest joining me. He is our baseball columnist here at the New York Post. He's had a lot to tweet about on this trade. The great John Heyman joins me now. John, how you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you, Dexter?
I'm doing good. Hot stove is heating up, man. Hot stove is heating up already. John, let me ask you this. You're always plugged in and you see all these deals. Was this deal a shocking one to you? Was this a shocking deal for you, the Mets trading Brandon Nimmo?
I'm not going to say shocking. There have been hints, starting at the very end of the season. Obviously, it was a disastrous season for the Mets. Nobody expected the Reds to be able to beat out the Mets for that final playoff spot. Last 3.5 months were very bad. From the end of the season on, there were some hints. I kind of thought they probably were going to hold on to Nimmo, but they needed to be more right-handed. They needed to have better defense, and this is a step in that direction. Certainly, they're losing offense here. Nimmo is one of their better hitters, beloved figure. Take the emotion out of it, though, and it does make sense. On paper, it makes sense what the Mets did.
Yeah, I think it does make a lot of sense in the fact that the Mets didn't have to eat any of this money. Marcus Semien, a guy who's a fantastic defender still at the age of 35. How do you like his fit into this Mets culture and lineup?
Well, I think Nimmo was great in the clubhouse, and Semien is great in his own way. A very serious guy, holds everybody accountable. Up until this year, basically played every game for several years. He's a guy who plays hurt. Now, he missed some games this year for the first time, but in quite a while. He's a very serious guy who's, really emphasizes winning. So, I think both guys are clubhouse pluses, but in their own way. As far as the money goes, I think the money works. Nimmo, someone might say the year too long on there, and but at $20 million a year with his production, 25 home runs, 92 RBIs, I think he's worth about his contract, and same for Semien. Obviously, only 15 home runs last year, and the injury year for Semien had 45 4 years previously, but still an outstanding defensive player. I think he was affected by his injury a little bit last year, and he'll be better. And I think he's worth about his contract too. I think for Texas, they wanted to get down in terms of the payout per year, right? And Nimmo makes less per year, and the Mets are sending $5 million, my understanding.
Yeah, you had tweeted about that. The Mets sending $5 million to the Texas Rangers with this deal and the swap for both players. David Stearns, John, has talked, and he talked at the GM meetings. He talked about wanting to improve this Mets team defensively. This is a move that seems to address that, and he's been about his word on that. Are there any players you're looking at that the Mets could target in free agency to sort of rebuild that outfield and that fits into what they want to do with still being good defensively while also trying to replace some of the production that Brandon Nimmo had that is going out the door?
Well, this won't help them in terms of right-handed versus left-handed, but we have reported that they are interested in Cody Bellinger, who had an outstanding defensive year, a 5-WAR season. He was excellent for the Yankees. Obviously, he's proven a New York player. He is the Yankees' number one priority, though. So, the Mets obviously were able to get Juan Soto by outpaying the Yankees and obviously giving them the suite and all that. But I don't know that they're going to be able to get Bellinger, but that's certainly a guy on their radar. I would think Harrison Bader should be on their radar because he had an outstanding season with Minnesota and Philly last year. It didn't appear that the Mets made a move for him at the deadline, and he certainly would have helped. You got to figure he would have given them one extra win when Cedric Mullins did not play well at all for the Mets, but they didn't want to bring him back, and I don't know if that'll change now, but he was outstanding for the Phillies and was just a Mets killer. So, he's right-handed. He's an outstanding defender and center. If they brought in Bader and Bellinger, they'd be terrific in center and in left and have overall a very good defensive outfield. But, that outfield market is pretty slim right now, and we'll see what they do. Obviously, they're going to need to trade McNeil at this point. He's out of a position. I think we understood that going in, that he was on the block. That much we did know. So they got a lot more moves to do. And of course, the top two moves that they need to do, 1 and 1A, are to bring back Pete Alonso. They can't lose that right-handed bat. And Edwin Diaz, who's one of the 2 or 3 best closers in baseball right now, they're covered as bare as far as right-handed relievers. They have basically Oscar Brazoban, and that's about it. So they certainly need to bring back Diaz. If they don't, they're really going to need to bulk up in that bullpen to make up for it.
Well, I'm glad you went there, John, because I want to ask about that. You said how it's imperative is for them to bring back Alonso and Diaz. How does that work for the Mets, or is this a challenge for them more for David Stearns and company when it comes down to negotiating? Because the agents of these players, Scott Boras being the agent of Pete Alonso, they know that the Mets need them. So are the Mets at a disadvantage where they're going to have to shell out the big bucks and to get this done sooner rather than later?
Well, free agency is difficult, and obviously Diaz had a fantastic year. Alonso had an excellent year, and they have other suitors. Certainly, Toronto is looking for a closer. I think Baltimore is as well. Detroit probably looking for a closer. Diaz may be a little rich for them, but there's going to be competition for Diaz. As far as Alonso goes, Boston is looking for a right-handed bat. Baltimore, I think, even though they gave Mountcastle a contract, I think they'd like to bring in Alonso, so he's got some suitors as well. It's not easy, but I do believe both guys have said they love being a Met, and I do believe that they do love being a Met, and they certainly have the wherewithal to do it. So I'm still going to be slightly surprised if either one of them leaves, but in free agency, anything can happen.
We know that anything can happen at all. You mentioned McNeil before, and that his time here in New York is likely over. What do you think the market is for McNeil? What could the Mets actually get for him? He's a guy who's not hit well over the last couple of seasons. What could the Mets get for McNeil on the open market?
Yeah, McNeil showed some versatility last year. He was decent in center field, so he can play the outfield in a pinch. Certainly can play the corners. He was decent at second base, at least if you look at the metrics. It was about even. So was not bad, but certainly Semien is going to be much better. That's why the Mets did it. I think he is tradable at this point. He does have $17.75 million to go for 1 year, so the Mets would have to offset that a bit. If I think Nimmo's worth $20 million, I don't think McNeil's worth $17.75 million. He's worth a bit less than that, but I think at this point there are teams that would be happy to have his offense. He did hit well last year up until the final few weeks where we had an injury. Just did have surgery. I don't know how that will impact the trade. They do think he's going to be ready for spring training. I do think that he was having a decent season up until, as I said, the last few weeks when the injury impacted him and prevented him from hitting like he can. But he's a decent offensive player. He's obviously won a batting title and only has 1 year to go, which is always a good selling point.
It is a good selling point there. Now, John, you and I talked, I think the last time we really, really talked was around the trade deadline, and we liked some of the moves the Mets made, and then those did not pan out well, and we saw how the season ended for the Mets. Now David Stearns makes this move, moving on from Brandon Nimmo. Do you think this move, because some of the fan base, and we're seeing this in the chat, some of the fan base, they're not happy with this move at all whatsoever, but do you think this move here to start the offseason, do you think this puts more pressure on David Stearns to get things right and get the Mets back towards being a contender here in 2026?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of pressure on David Stearns. Being a general manager in New York, the pressure is immense to begin with. Obviously, he did not have the year in his second year that he had in his first year. Seemed like everything went right in that first year. They had that kind of magical run in the playoffs, took the Dodgers to 6 games in the NLCS. It was an outstanding season, unexpected. This year was unexpected in the wrong way. Obviously, the two best moves were to bring back Alonso and to sign Soto. They performed. Those felt more like Steve Cohen's moves. So David Stearns had a rough winter last year, obviously. Montas was a complete bust. Manaea has got 2 more years to go, but he certainly did not perform in year 1 of that $75 million deal. And the moves at the deadline did not work. No matter what our opinions may have been on that day, Cedric Mullins was terrible. And Helsley, who I think is a very good pitcher and will do well in free agency, somehow got killed every time he pitched. I mean, it was unbelievable. A guy throwing 101 miles an hour. I don't know if he was tipping or what, but it did not work. So The moves were not good in the winter, and they were even worse in the summer. And obviously, there's pressure on a guy who's one of the top two paid GMs in baseball, or baseball president, as we say. No longer
No, there's a
GM, baseball president.
baseball president. Got to get that title right, John. We got to make sure we have that title right for him. A lot of Mets fans are going to want to know about what the market could be for them in terms of adding an ace. There seems a lot of Mets fans saying, hey, we want to see this team get an ace. Is it likely the Mets get themselves an ace this season? Can they trade for an ace? How likely do you think it is? Or is that even a priority for David Stearns and company to
Oh yeah,
improve
I
this
mean, I
pitching
think it
staff and get an
is.
ace?
Adding an ace is not easy. I mean, Skubal is
No.
the one clear ace that could be out there, and I think they'll probably gauge the interest around the league in Skubal. I still think it was a surprise if Tarek Skubal is traded. So there's one ace, and he's if he is traded, he's going to go to one other team. So it could be anybody. The other guys I wouldn't exactly call them aces. There are, I would say, three very good pitchers who at the best maybe an ace: Framber Valdez, Dylan Cease, and then of course Tatsuya Imai from Japan. And the Mets are certainly going to look at all of them, and certainly could bring in one of them. I would look at them more as probably number two type starters, but certainly front end pitchers, and would certainly improve the team quite a bit. But in terms of an ace, maybe I'm stingy on my definition of ace, but I think Tarek Skubal's the only game in town, and that's a tough one to get.
No. I think it's fine to be stingy on that. We can't call everybody an ace, right? Just because the best pitcher on the team doesn't make you necessarily a bona fide ace. So I do agree with you on that. I guess to wrap things here, John, you talked about taking the emotion out of this when you're looking at this trade with Brandon Nimmo going to Texas, and I mean him waiving his no trade clause and going to Texas now. Overall, I got the sense from you feel like this is a good deal for the Mets. Do you feel like this is a good one for them?
It's a logical deal. It's an understandable first step. I'm sorry to see Brandon Nimmo go. He's beloved not only by the fans, but throughout the organization. Certainly sets them back offensively and makes it kind of almost imperative they bring back Alonso at this point. If they do bring back Alonso and add a comparable hitter in the outfielder, whether that be Bellinger or somebody else, I think it works out great. It makes sense to me because of the defense and the fact that Semien is right-handed and Nimmo is left-handed. They were way too left-handed, right? So they need to get more right-handed, and this is certainly a start. So I would say it's logical. I'm not going to call it a home run trade or anything like that, but it makes sense for a team that really was a disaster last year. And they can't come back and bring back the same team. If their whole move is to have Diaz and Alonso come back, and it's the same team they had. So the narrative will be they brought back a disaster of a team. So I do think change makes sense. This is a start. I don't think we can grade it yet. It's too early. Let's see what they do in the rest of the offseason.
No, I agree. It's going to take some time before we start grading the offseason. I do like the word you used there. I do think it's a logical deal. I think that's fair to look at this and think that it's logical when you take the emotion out of it, even though the Mets fans are going to miss Brandon Nimmo for sure. But we'll see how it all pans out. That, everybody, is John Heyman, MLB columnist for us here at the New York Post, doing a fantastic job all over this trade. John, I'm sure I'll talk to you a lot in the next month, and we'll see what moves the Mets make down the road. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Dexter.
Anytime. Once again, John Heyman, check out his work here with us, the New York Post, NewYorkPost.com. Appreciate everybody rocking with us here in the chat. A lot of you have a lot of great comments on this and all this going on with this trade. I see some guys saying, I don't know about this trade. I see Soto Edits saying that. And listen, I understand if you're torn about this trade because you liked Brandon Nimmo. I was texting a friend of mine who, said, hey, sad to see Nimmo go, but understands why this trade had to be made. And I get it from the Mets standpoint. And I do think the Mets have to improve defensively. I think if you're a Mets fan, if you've been covering this team, you've been watching this team, they had to get better defensively. Anthony Rivera talked about this. This was a weakness of the team. They've got to get better defensively. Now, there's a lot we can talk about here, and I think it does put a lot of, and I understand it. I understand the anxiety that is going to come for a lot of fans. It's like, okay, they made this move. They lost some offense. Semien's not going to be the guy that can really do it for the team at the plate. What happens next? You got to wait and see. You have to try to trust Stearns. I understand for some of you that you lost your trust in Stearns, particularly with what happened at the deadline. Although I'm in agreement with John Heyman on this one. I thought the moves at the deadline were good. I really like the moves at the deadline. But players have agency. Players have to execute. Those players didn't execute. Now, is that fully on Stearns? I'd say no. But here's the thing. When you're GM, president of baseball operations, you only have so many misses. John Heyman pointed out the miss with Frankie Montas, and we all know how that went. We all understand that. And I think there is pressure on the Mets to rebuild their pitching. Absolutely. But the moves they make in the next couple of weeks, how they choose to rebuild this outfield is going to be really, really important. As important as I will say, as bringing back Pete Alonso, bringing back Edwin Diaz. I think both guys should come back. It'll be nice if both guys come back. I also agree with John Sapanaro that Diaz is probably the more important of the two. Now, will both those contracts be great at the end? Probably not. But I do think that it's important they bring those guys back. And I do also think it's important that the Mets sort of showed that they were going to change the culture in terms of how defense was going to look on this team. Tough day. If you're a Brandon Nimmo fan, you love Brandon Nimmo here, I completely understand it. I understand it. But if you just really look at this logically and you look at the money he was being paid, which he was paid to be a center fielder, which he no longer was, and you looked at how he was in left field defensively and his body breaking down, I understand why the Mets have to make this move. Now, is Marcus Semien the long-term answer at second base? No, I don't think so. And I think it'll be interesting to see how Ronnie Mauricio develops, how Acuna Jr. develops, in all of that. How do they factor into that? Can they get better as players in that? I think that's going to be a factor. But I think to have a guy like Semien, who you heard from John Heyman, is a good clubhouse leader, is a guy who should fit into this Mets culture, is a no-nonsense guy. I think it'll be fine. I think the Mets will figure out down the road what they'll want to do at second base. I don't think Marcus Semien is a long-term answer, but it'll be interesting. As far as free agents, sure. I think Cody Bellinger will be a nice move. Anthony and I were going to do a Thanksgiving episode and try to build some things around what we thought were good moves that the Mets could make to improve their team and close the gap on the Dodgers. And Cody Bellinger was a guy I had high on that list. Now, it's a tough market. The Yankees, I'll tell you what, the Yankees and the Yankee fans sure absolutely do not want to lose Cody Bellinger. Could you imagine if the Yankees lost two free agents in a row to the Mets back-to-back years? Whew. That'd be interesting. Now, hey, it's good for us. I'd love to talk about it, but not good for the Yankee fans. That would be interesting, but I do think overall this is a good trade. How good is a strong word. I'm going to go with what John Heyman said. I'm going to regurgitate his word. I think it's logical. I think it makes sense. I see the vision. I understand the move, but I think a lot of how good people feel about this trade, yes, obviously it's going to be how do the Mets do next year? How are they in 2026? Because they can't be disappointing as much as they were in 2025. That will change the vibes on this. But I think where the vibes are really important on this trade are going to be how do they reshape this outfield? What are the next couple moves they make? Are they able to add a ace pitcher or a star frontline pitcher that can help this rotation in the areas the Mets needed to improve on? And I think if you're a Mets fan looking at this, you had to think it was defense was up there and also pitching. They had to get better in both of those areas that they lacked. I do think the hitting will be better. You hope some players take a step forward, whether it's Alvarez, whether it's Brett Baty, whether he's here or not. And we still don't know what other moves David Stearns has up his sleeve. David Stearns talked about wanting to improve the defense. He went out and did that today. You have to say he at least put his, I won't say money where his mouth is, but he at least kept his word in terms of doing that today and tried to improve the defense. Are the Mets probably a tad bit worse offensively? Yes. But we will see how all of this shakes out, and which is a very important, huge offseason for the New York Mets that continues. And I do agree, the pressure on David Stearns only continues and continues. And we'll see what happens next. What can they get for Jeff McNeil? How do they reshape the bullpen, which needs some right-handed arms? All of that. could be very interesting. Let us know what you think. And my guy, Brian Fonseca, shout out to you. I see you in here. Brian says, Dex, we can't judge this in a vacuum. This is going to be part of a series of moves. It has to be. I agree. I agree with that. I think especially a trade like this that leads off the hot stove season, right? You can't just say, oh, I don't like it. Again, I'm not telling you guys out there that feel some kind of way that Brandon Nimmo is no longer in the Mets uniform. I'm not telling you not to feel some kind of way. I get it. Homegrown guy. But I think if you really step back, you look at what his production was, not just offensively, but defensively too, and the injuries and all that, and understand that David Stearns is doing what he says he wants to do and the kind of team that he's trying to build, this makes sense in where he's going to go. This is not in a vacuum. This is a situation you have to look at what comes next, and you have to judge this offseason in totality and everything that David Stearns does. It is a big one, and we'll see what happens. Soto Edis says, I don't care what they get for Jeff McNeil. I'm assuming he's talking about they could cut him for all I care. Damn. I mean, I get it. Sometimes when you're done, you're done. I understand. And I said this on the show with Anthony Rivera. I said I thought the Mets this offseason, I thought it was time for them to move on from both Jeff McNeil and Brandon Nimmo. So that's when I said that to John Sapanaro when he came in here. That's why I wasn't shocked necessarily that this happened. I was maybe shocked at the timing of it, and then also the fact the Mets didn't have to eat any money here, that other than the $5 million they sent to Texas, but not my money, but to Steve Cohen, that's chump change. So they're not worried about this at all. I see a lot of you here, talking about trading for Skubal, signing Valdez, and I know fans are going to be different on this. This is something else we'll talk about more through the offseason. How all in should the Mets go for an ace? If it's Skubal, I'll give my opinion here now. Well, I think you give up what you need to get a pitcher of his caliber. Yeah, I understand. There's a year left on his deal. You don't know if it will sign. You got to go all in. This is a Mets team that is trying to win now. So they have to make moves to try to win now. They can't just go and sign everybody and just spend and not care about fit and all of that. I think David Stearns is trying to think about all of that. But the Mets have a core that is trying to win now. And they have to go for it. So if you can go get a Skubal, you go get it. You go do it. Now, could you go get an Alcantara? Dylan Cease is another name you're going to hear about here and there. Sure. I think some of the stuff that you heard John Sapanaro talk about with Kyle Tucker, possibly Fernando Tatis, if the Padres are looking to sell off players and there's another big move down the road for the Mets, I'm not opposed to it. I'm not opposed to it at all. At the end of the day, I think that they've got to bring in talent that fits and works for this team. And there's a lot of pressure on everybody. There's pressure on Stearns. There's pressure on Mendoza. There's a lot of pressure on everybody. And the Mets are absolutely going to be busy, as my guy Brian Fonseca says here. Zach Flackerton says, it's a very even keel trade, and the winner will only be proven by the performance. I mean, here's what I'll say to that. Performance obviously always matters. This is a results business that we talk about in sports. We all love sports here. Sometimes the performance, and I want to say this for Marcus Semien, I think his defensive value, we will see how much that matters to the Mets. If he's supplemented and the right players are around him, and this goes for a lot of other people on the team, I think that will help lift everybody's standard and performance up, and we'll see how that goes. And so much of how other guys perform will be guys taking pressure off it. John Sapanaro talked about this, and he alluded to this in a conversation when he was on an episode here with me, and he was talking about how much concerned he was about the bottom of the Mets lineup. If the Mets put the right pieces into this lineup, and Marcus Semien, you're right, is your 7 or 8 hitter, even if he's hitting 230 there, but he's a professional and is playing good defense, I think Mets fans will be fine with that. Better than the limited options that they were getting out of the bottom of the lineup last year. Jason7638 says, Stearns has to surprise me with the moves he makes after making such a move like this. Or he just made it easier for me to finally hang up my Mets gloves. This move might be the one. This is the one that's going to make you quit the Mets? There's a lot. I don't know, Jason. I don't know how old you are. I don't know how long you've been watching the Mets, but I feel like there's a whole lot of other moves that could have made you quit the Mets. I'm not telling you not to quit the Mets. I'm just saying there's a whole lot of other things that I think could have made you quit the Mets. But I understand for some Mets fans, this is tough. So the edit says, what could the Mets even give up for Screwball, Jonah Tong, Brandon Sproat? It's going to take a lot. I'll say that. It's going to take a lot. I think it's going to take two of their top pitching prospects. I think there's a world in where it could be Tong and Sproat. Maybe you hold on to McClain. I think there's a world in which that could happen. Would I do it? Yeah. I'd do it. I do it. I'm not into the prospect hugging. I'm not a prospect hugger. And there's a lot more. We'll get into this and down the road. And we'll take some of your questions from here. We'll do a mailbag and all of that stuff here on Straight Outta Flushing. But there's a lot more we can get into down the road. But if you told me that was part of the price, yeah. For the best pitcher in the game right now, yeah, I'd do it. I'd absolutely do it. eTourist 11207 says center field, left field, first base, DH, starting pitcher, and bullpen. Damn, we got a lot of holes to fill. David Stern's got a lot of work to do, man. You're not wrong about that. They've got a lot of work to do. And this is what makes this offseason so interesting and how they shape the team, how they get better defensively. Do they have the right bats? Do they have the right pieces to complement Soto and Lindor and Alonso if he's back, or Diaz if he's back? There's a lot of things they have to do. Asbury Mark says, no to Valdez, go after Michael King. Michael King's actually a move I wouldn't mind the Mets making. I think that would be good. And Joe Ryan or Pablo Lopez. So that could be good. My producer here, Tommy Cohen, who's a Yankees fan, which is kind enough to still produce the show, he had to let me know, former Yankee there as well. Jason also added, could be momentary emotions that might fade off. I felt this way in recent times and it wasn't enough to make me give up. Yeah, no, Jason, that's what I was saying before. I'm not going to be the person here telling a fan how to feel about this trade or that you shouldn't be emotional about it. Like, we like sports. Sports, there's emotions tied into sports, and that's fine. You know, I think sometimes you're right. It could be momentary and it might fleet. The feeling might be fleeting, and you look back at this and say, okay, I see the logic in this. But I also understand why there's emotion for the Mets fan and Brandon Nimmo. We should pay Brandon Nimmo, the proper respect here. Was a good Met, a homegrown Met, really developed well, really played hard. Unfortunately, just injuries have hurt him in the last couple of years. But I think when you look at this, if you don't just look at the production offensively and you look at the Mets getting off this money, I do think you can see the logic in this and what the Mets were able to accomplish here. But at the end of the day, right, no matter what we say here and what we all discuss here, a lot of this is going to come down to the rest of the moves that David Stearns makes this offseason and what is going to be an important one, a busy one, and one that Mets fans are going to scrutinize, just like you guys are scrutinizing this trade. That's it. Is it going to be big moves by Stearns? Are there going to be small moves? And I know none of you guys want to see it. You don't want to see small market Stearns. That's not what you came here for. And I think there's a way in which Stearns has been really good at finding moves on the margins at times, and it worked well in year one. But then you also saw things not go so well, like Frankie Montas. So we will see. Brian Fonseca says, whatever you do, keep Diaz. P2, but Diaz especially. That's kind of what John Sapanaro was saying. Diaz is top of the list. I do think the Mets have to keep Diaz. So we will see how all that goes. I wasn't able to get to everybody's comments, but I want to say there was a lot of great comments by everybody here. We do go back and look at these comments. We will have them in other shows to bring on. This was an impromptu live episode of Straight Outta Flushing. I'm so grateful to see all of you guys tap in with us, join, send your comments. It is always great to interact with the great New York sports fans, especially the Mets fans. I know you guys are very passionate about what could possibly happen this season for the New York Mets coming up in 2026. But first, we got to get through the offseason and see how all that goes. Hot stove, man. It is heating up already. Surprise trade on a Sunday here. Got to thank everybody who rocked with us on the show. My first guest, Anthony Rivera, Subway to Shea podcast. Please check them out there. John Sapanaro of the Till Mets Do Us Part podcast with my guy, Ibby. They do a fantastic job on that show. And of course, we have one of the best in the game, our great MLB insider and columnist, John Heyman, who's kind enough to give me some great time and insight on what is going on with the Mets this offseason and this move as the Mets trade Brandon Nimmo for Marcus Semien. As always, thank you to you, the fans. My director and producer, Tommy Cohen, did a fantastic job on this live. Everybody behind the scenes. We'll catch you next time on another edition of Straight Outta Flushing. Got a lot coming up in the next couple of weeks as we get to the winter meetings and beyond. So please stay tuned with us. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button on the New York Post Sports YouTube channel. I'm Dexter Henry, and I'll catch you next time, as I said, another edition of Straight Outta Flushing. Peace.